Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Akil, and welcome to this session, KodeKloud Live. Joining me today is Geoff Burke, and we're going to talk about all things data protection wise. So let me pull him up. Hey, Geoff, how's it going?
Hi, how you doing, Patrick? Pleased to be
Good.
here.
Good as well. Before we do that, though, let me share why we have these sessions in the first place, because it's about free week, all in the mantra of knowledge sharing. This week and twice a year, we have free week. That means that from the 25th of September until the 1st of October, all the premium courses that you can find on KodeKloud are completely free. So you get to experience that premium access. That means that you'll have access to 65 plus premium courses, over 500 interactive labs, and even KodeKloud engineering, which is like a real life case that you can implement by yourself and learn from. Here you have a small example of what a hands-on lab looks like. On the left, you have, for example, multiple choice questions. On the right, your terminal. So to answer those questions, you'll actually have to do some hands-on work with regards to the terminal, figure out what you need, and then answer appropriately. What I love and one of the things that KodeKloud offers are these learning paths. So they're either role-based or they're domain-based. And in the domain-based, you find different technologies. Kubernetes is in there, HashiCorp is in there, Docker as well as cloud-based technologies, which is really cool. And if we pick, for example, the DevOps engineer role-based learning path, here you can see really from scratch, getting the basics right, and will guide you through kind of the course material there. If you don't really know where to start, you can fill in your information through a test as well. And then we kind of define your skill level. And based on that skill level, we have a different learning track for you. For example, basic, or if you already are familiar with containers or you want to deep dive into specific infrastructure as code, we got you covered there as well. And one of my favorite features is this. I can only spend actually 2 hours a day, not 4 or 6, which is quite a shame. And for me to complete this learning path, it would then take 4 or 5 months. So you can get quite the indication there. Go to KodeKloud. Everything's free right now until the 1st of October and enjoy kind of that premium experience because it's a lot of fun. Now, back to my conversation with Geoff. Let me kick it off because you're a data protection architect, right? And data protection, I think, is never going to go away. But I'm wondering, throughout your experience, what have you kind of seen in where it comes from, let's say a few years back, and what it is now? Are they kind of the same challenges, or have they evolved as time evolved as well?
So there's different perspectives. One's the perspective of the actual data protection professionals, and then
Mm,
there's perspective, I guess, of the businesses. So from the point of view of data protection professionals, things have changed a lot. When I first joined IT, the backup job was the job that the new person always got because it was the horrible job. It was tapes that would break. To have big boss coming down saying, "Oh, my vacation photos have been lost. Restore them," and you have to go and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but we had a you know fatal exception error on tape, whatever." So it was
yeah.
not a fun, yeah, it was not a fun job. And what's happened is over time, because of the importance of data protection, the more data has gained in importance, the more data protection has also gained in importance. And linked to that, the tools to be able to perform data protection have improved enormously. So now, in fact, being the backup administrator is probably one of the fun, well, I wouldn't say fun jobs, but it's one of the superstar jobs. Why? Because the
Mm,
tools are there that you can leverage to restore. And when people get things back they thought were lost, that's a great feeling. It's almost like you're a doctor for data protection. When it comes to the companies, um, I think it's kind of like in the beginning, people didn't really pay attention to it. They had their tapes, whatever. And the more horror stories that appear in the media about, companies have lost everything, especially with ransomware, it's being taken very seriously. So it's not
mhm.
that they didn't take it seriously in the past, but I don't think it was top of the agenda. Now, I think that every single company, which is a serious company, which I think most are, they think data protection because it's just too important to lose your data.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I mean, I don't know if data got more valuable or we just got better at using the data more effectively, right? Because some businesses are only as good as your data, right? And even when there is a free service, you still kind of pay with your data sometimes, even though you might not realize it. So data is valuable for companies, which means it's also valuable for any party that wants to exploit that, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. This whole data thing emerged over the last, what, 30 years. I think if you're going right from the beginnings, and now it basically equals money. That's
Mm.
what ransomware has proven, right? Your data equals money. And so it's an evolution. I don't think it's going to go backwards. I think it's only going to go forwards. And you're right. Another aspect is data, your personal data is leveraged. So you get these free services, and you think, "Wow, this is wonderful, free." And as my mother used to say to me, the only thing free is cheese and a mousetrap, which isn't a little bit too extreme. But at the same time, obviously, there's always something lurking. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that the data, so for instance, if Geoff is interested in data protection, the search engines are all going to say, "Hey, Geoff likes data protection." So obviously that'll all be leveraged. So it's monetary. Let's face it. It makes money. It is money in a way, and it has to be protected. Just like any asset you have. You have a house. You want to insure it. You have health insurance, things like that. I think it's on that level now.
Yeah, I get that. And when it comes to the technologies, I mean, technology has evolved. It's always going to keep evolving. Do the common breaches or like specific breaches that you've experienced, are they usually a technology issue where there's something that wasn't patched properly, where there's a backdoor, or is there a human component there as well? Because I always think humans sometimes are more flawed than systems.
Yeah, so that's another important thing. There's always talk about the big evil hacker genius, but I think if you look at the majority of things that go wrong, they're very simple things. It's like I get this email, "Hey Geoff, it's IT department, ASAP, send me your password because
Yeah.
whatever." And the problem here is that, and I've seen this. It's not that people just are kind of clued out. No, it's just that we as human beings, unlike machines have moods too, but we have good days and bad days. So some days you'll come to the office and everything will just flow, and some days you'll have a bad day. Well, if you get that email on a bad day and your boss is bothering you and something else, and you just say, "Okay, here's my password," and that can happen. So the human factor is enormous. Now, at the same time, though, we can't underestimate just things that go wrong. For instance, data centers, floods, disasters. Um,
Yeah.
I think the important thing to remember is that our generation now understands that the unexpected can happen. I mean, that I use the COVID pandemic is a great example. I mean, this is something that I guess the Spanish flu at the beginning of the 1900s, but our parents' generation didn't have anything nearly as big as this. And what
Yeah.
it shows us is that we have to be flexible, that there are things that can happen outside of the plan, and they can be disasters, which not only affect now the physical world, but also our data world. And so we have to have plans available. And there's a combination. The threats are a combination. There's the human factor, there are mistakes, there are natural disasters, and then there is the so-called enemy, the person who wants to leverage your data against you for whatever reason, to make money, or it could be something else. And so you have to take all these things in mind. And I think that's really progressed because, again, it was an evolution. Now people take this seriously. There are disaster recovery plans. These are put in audits. So there's an understanding. And unfortunately, a lot of times these understandings come when people get burnt. Right? It's not that somebody woke up in the morning, "I'm going to make a disaster recovery plan." No, it's probably that somebody had a disaster and who's at fault? You're at fault. I'm at fault. No, no. Okay, well, let's calm down. Let's just not repeat it next time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the disasters that have happened outside of your organization, luckily outside of the organization that you're in, can be a great learning point, right? And be like, okay, maybe we were where they were when the disaster happened, and we definitely need something in place to prevent whatever happened to them. Because I mean, you never want to be in it when shit hits the fan, right? You want to prevent that. It's like insurance, basically. You want to make sure that all your bases are covered in that way.
And that's important also when it comes to IT communities, because one of the things that I find very, very valuable is sharing with other IT professionals. Because obviously, if your organization has a problem, you're not going to go, especially if you're working for a bank, you're not going to advertise, "Hey, we got ransomware." All right, your
Nothing
bank
happened
won't
here.
exist anymore.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've seen this happen, subtly talk about, subtly is the word, right? "I heard that someone over there had a problem, and what would you do?" And so we share knowledge, and that's an enormously powerful thing. And I think that, for instance, if you look at the KodeKloud Slack and the community, you see people sharing ideas about, the CKA exam and all this. But there's a lot of that also goes on when it comes to security, where we can really help one another. I mean, your company will probably still hire a super duper, security consultant, most likely. But the problem is that data protection, data security is such a huge, enormous field, and the threats are always evolving, that it's good to keep your ear down on the railroad track, listening to the trains coming. And that can be done through community and through IT professional sharing. That's a really powerful tool against this.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like because it is so, I mean, I would say complex, but also ever evolving, like you touched upon, you want kind of a diverse perspective. And what better way than to leverage a community, right, to get that perspective? You might not even have the same history as someone else technically, or even the domain or the area you grew up in can be different. But that all can be information, bits and pieces to make sure that whatever recovery plan you have or prevention plan you have is as robust and resilient as possible. So I really love that. I don't
Yeah,
think there's
exactly.
a.
And one thing I'll add
Go
about
ahead.
that is you were very right there where you're saying it's very big and very diverse. What every true IT specialist knows is what they don't know. And so, for instance, when
Mhm.
my neighbor says, "Hey, Geoff, my Windows, what is it now? Windows." I'm going to say Windows 98. Oh my goodness! But my Windows computer is broken. Can you come and fix it? And I go, well, I actually do Kubernetes and data protection. Oh, that's great, but it's computers, right? So it's the same thing. Or, well, no. And so that's important. Is that it's a very big field. And so this is where we can help one another. It really helps out. And also, I stress again the evolving nature of the attack, which is always happening. On the bright side, there's always a bright side. It's global. So the beauty of
Mm.
this, and you see this in the KodeKloud community, you will see people from every country in the world coming together, right? So it's not like you're stuck in your little city, and you're going to your little club where there's a few IT people. No, I mean, this is worldwide. So it's very powerful when we leverage this. And a lot of stuff that I do, I get enormous help from my peers. It's not because I'm so smart. It's because I'm leveraging people and they're leveraging me too. I might know this area, someone knows that area better. So it's very important cooperation.
It is one of my favorite aspects of kind of being in the tech domain is the openness when it comes to knowledge sharing, right? It's not like, oh, I have this piece of information, I have to keep it to myself. Everyone's like, this is really cool, this is really valuable. And for some reason, everyone is willing and open to share. And I think that is like a fantastic trait. Maybe it's because of the field I'm in, but I don't know of a different domain where it is the same as in the tech field. Maybe it has to do with the technologies that are ever evolving and the fact that everyone has to kind of learn and reinvent themselves every so often. But it's a really cool like feeling to
Yeah.
be part of it, I think. Uh, when it comes to then data protection specifically, I'm always interested in anything you've seen gone wrong, either from a standpoint of inside an organization or from outside when something happened and you were there when it comes to a recovery plan or a prevention plan for in the future. Is there any tidbit or any insights you can share with regards to those examples?
So yeah, I've seen a lot of problems, and sometimes they're self-inflicted, sometimes they're not. And
Hmm.
the important thing to realize is that when you make a disaster recovery plan, this now I'm just talking actual procedure, and I think it's important. When you make a disaster recovery plan, it's very important to test it. And I'm not just saying this, because well, you should test, because what I have seen is even some of the best IT specialists, when they're suddenly put under enormous pressure, so you've
Hmm.
got production down, you don't always react the way you would if you're calm, and
Yeah.
not everybody reacts well. And I've seen people who would be normally calm, but for whatever reason, maybe they had a problem in their personal life that day, whatever, and then that night production goes down. So these combinations. So if you practice, it's like the firefighters. You go in 1,000 times, you practice, it goes into automatic mode.
Yeah.
So then you don't have to rely on this, first time going through this and being not in the right mood or being exhausted. The other thing to remember too is not to make a disaster recovery plan which is set in stone. This is
Hmm.
really important. I've seen organizations that are very good in the sense they'll have their disaster recovery plan, they'll make it, and everyone will practice 1,000 times, but then they're like the horses, with the blinders on, and they're just going forward. But the problem with disasters is they're like the pandemic. They like to play tricks. They like to come out with a new variant and do this. And so one of the things I've seen is that companies are too stiff, their procedures are too stiff, and then they're basically stuck because,
Yeah.
well, we didn't expect that to happen. So I've been in situations where basically, well, what I'd say is sometimes no disaster is alike. I mean, ransomware is all the same, but there's always differences and whatnot. Be prepared to think out of the box during a disaster. Have your plan, have your what you've practiced, but also keep in mind you might need some other outlets. You might need some other. So flexibility is important. I would include that in disaster recovery plan. What else can we do? What if, okay, we got the super software, it works, we got these super specialists, they know what they're doing, but what if this happens? What if that happens? Think out of the box. Because the problem is the attack, if it's an attack, or the disaster, if it's just natural causes, can be different each time. and it'll
Yeah.
come and it won't. Your plan, well, that wasn't our plan. You can't say, well, that wasn't our plan, so no, no, it's a disaster. You have to fix it. So that's an important thing.
Is there then in kind of the majority of organizations you've seen, because you've mentioned three stages, there being a plan is kind of one of them testing the plan is one of them as well, and then them being flexible enough to kind of accommodate for an ever-changing world? Where do you think most organizations are at, actually?
It's hard to say because it's changing quickly.
Yeah.
So right at this given point in time, it's very hard for me to say. Luckily, in recent past, I haven't had to deal with anything really bad. But I can say that, for instance, when I first started doing this, and it was mainly physical servers, for instance,
Mhm.
organizations, some didn't have a clue, and they just didn't. They were always using, oh, this costs so much to have the DR and all this.
Yeah.
But what they realized very quickly was it costs a lot more to lose all your data. So that was one, I'd say, the incubation period of data protection. Then it came to the, as they say, the check mark thing. Okay, we hired this consultant, said, do this, do this, do this, check mark, check mark, check mark, practice it once, great, and forget it.
Mm.
Also, it's better than nothing. And then you see organizations which are very worried about this and will
Yeah.
literally have, once a quarter a practice. Because remember, the other thing about the practice is this, is that, and every IT person knows this, your environment rarely stays the same. I mean, no one's running exactly the same thing 2010 that they are running now. I mean, Kubernetes and whatnot. And so your disaster recovery plan has to evolve with your systems. And one of the problems I've seen in organizations that are always under pressure, financial pressure, is there's limited staff and there's technical debt. And
Mm.
so there's a lot of things they have to get done. And so disaster recovery, well, yeah, it might happen, might not happen. They kind of put it off. And then they have their disaster and it finds out that the technologies are different. Something changed, this changed. Oh my goodness. So that is really important. But it's difficult because it takes what I would call corporate IT discipline.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's boring. I mean, what could be boring in IT? Audits, boring? No, I love them. But at the same time, if something ever happens, being prepared, it'll mean the difference between spending 20 hours online nonstop or 3 or 4 hours, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you mean. I mean, discipline is really the right word, right? Unless you're intrinsically motivated to do something, when you have to do something, you need discipline. And sometimes, like a disaster recovery plan, it's not really top of mind when it comes to people that are building a product, right? Their main focus is building that product, making it an awesome product, making sure it lands, has impact, all that sort of stuff. And talking about insurance and what if a disaster happens, how do you recover from that? That's not really on the agenda. That's never going to be top of mind. So then how you get that top of mind is by having discipline, basically. And I don't think, I mean, it's a hard thing to do bottom up. I really think top down, you have to have that discipline also. So you have a vision of where you want to stand security wise within your company and organization. And then it trickles down and people kind of uphold that vision and start believing in it. And then, I mean, then things start moving by themselves, I feel like. But
Yeah.
that's the hard part, getting
And then
that
there's
top down
fear. There's fear
communication.
is the other thing that, unfortunately, with human beings, sometimes it's fear is the only thing that works. So, the top manager wakes up in the morning, picks up their newspaper and reads, oh, this company had ransomware, paid $50 million. Like,
Mm.
oh, where's the DR specialist? We don't have one. Well, now we do. So that's one thing that I've seen. I haven't seen happen. I've heard happened in some companies. So
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel like the kind of cost of ownership has also reduced with the introduction of technologies like Kubernetes or solutions that are running on the cloud now, security wise? Because I feel like from a software engineering point of view, I can get stuff running a lot quicker than I used to, right? I don't need a server and rack anymore, and I can deploy to the cloud. Everything scales kind of automatically with their solutions. And security is accommodated for, but in some degrees, not really. Like, how do you feel about that cost of ownership
So
there?
yeah, it's a difficult question for me to answer because I'm not actually in that field of calculating the cost. So this is gonna be more of a, I would say, my abstract idea of what I've kind of understand things to be.
Yeah.
So I think it's yes and no. I think when you think of what we're asking for our data to do now and we're asking for our compute to do now compared to 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I mean, our lives now run on this.
Mm.
So, if it costs more in that sense, but then it costs less in the sense we're getting so much more value of it. I mean, let's go back to the pandemic. What would have happened if the pandemic had happened in 1970? I mean, online schooling, all that. No, we would have basically everything would have
Nope.
shut down, or
Yeah.
or we just would have let it happen. Everyone would have. So there is a cost there. Then there's of course, I would say the more powerful, the more reliant we become on these things, the more important it is to actually learn these technologies and have people in your organization who know them.
Hmm.
That could be a big, I would say, hidden cost. I've seen organizations try to wing it. So I don't want to hire that person because but certifications, but they cost me too much. And then they try to implement a technology anyways, like Kubernetes. And
Hmm.
I'll give you an example from my background. Um, I was going to implement Kubernetes because I wanted to create a NS3 Minio. It was a long time ago. And I thought, well, I'll just read it on the weekend. I've been in IT for a long time. I'll read a book over the weekend or whatever, or look some YouTube videos. On Monday, I'll set it up. Well, that didn't happen on Monday, obviously, because I was like, whoa. In the end, I think after a couple of weeks, I used Docker Swarm, which was easier. Um, but what it reminded me was the a bit of humility that these are complicated technologies. You have to respect them, and to respect them, you have to learn them. So KodeKloud, I'm not advertising. I'm just saying this is from my personal experience. Um, IT professionals have to keep themselves in shape, in mental shape, as far as knowing the technologies, and corporations have to teach their employees. There's always a risk they might leave, but it's better to have that as a problem than have people who don't really know what they're doing, who are struggling, not through their own fault, because that is a major cost. And I think
Yeah,
implementation of Kubernetes, I think if people look at statistics, probably mistakes are costing companies more than the cost of the actual whatever you're paying for. Unless you leave an instance of AWS on for like 5 months, forget about it. That might cost you quite a bit.
that's chunky. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm wondering because we touched more so on the kind of protective side, but the offensive side keeps evolving as well, right? And I can assume that, sure, with the human factor in there, there's a component that keeps kind of steady and stable, and figuring out kind of what makes someone tick if they have a bad day and then the right email slips through and they respond to that. Like that's always going to be kind of an opening or a breach possibility. But from the offensive side, technologies also keep kind of evolving. Do you think it gets easier or harder? Like, I don't know what that balance is, where it's like two sides are like battling against each other and they're both growing at the same speed because they're using the same technology. Like, I feel like that's always going to be there for the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because um, certainly as technology advances, the ability to misuse it advances as well.
Yeah.
And attack is always kind of ahead. And of course, one of the big questions now coming out is with the whole chat GPT thing.
Hmm.
Is this going to be like the old term script kiddie? If you remember that script kiddie term, the person doesn't code or anything, but can just use a script and then hack a bank. Is this script kiddie on steroids, basically,
Yeah.
right? Chat GPT. So these questions are very hard to answer. What I have learned in my career is predicting things is I would never bet on what I predict because it's hard to. I personally think though that we're very resilient people, and
Hmm.
yes, there'll be threats, but if you look at the history, we tend to deal with threats pretty quickly. And a lot of times after an initial problem, the people who are affected by threats, the people didn't take it seriously or missed something.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the Windows updates patches. There was a company I knew that they had a they said to me once, I had to reboot their server because the VSS wasn't working properly for backups. And they said, no, this is a 24/7 shop. We never reboot our servers. I was
Hmm.
like, this is Windows 2003 server. And I'm like, really? You never reboot your servers? That means all those updates have not been implemented. Have you ever
Yep.
thought about, that's just like a leaking box. I mean, hackers delight. And they hadn't thought of that. Now, I don't know what happened to them. Maybe they changed that. But but let's face it, that's not the hacker getting smarter. And remember too, offense gets smart, but offense is lazy too.
Hmm.
If you ask, a real criminal hacker, they're looking for someone who's going to be easy target, right? Because they don't want to waste time and they don't want to get caught. They want it fast, fast, easy. So they're going to look first for the vulnerable. So as
Yeah.
long as you keep yourself protected, you keep up to date with security, keep your backups, at least you're protected. Now, if somebody for some reason targets you specifically and has a great team, that's going to be a problem, obviously. But most of the time, it's not that. Most of the time, they're looking for easy targets. So just don't make yourself an easy target, and that's half the game, I think, won. And I think that'll continue forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Here's an interesting thought. Let's say you own a company and the company is still kind of small or scale up size, at least below, let's say 30 people, which is how I would kind of label startup, I guess, people wise. How would you kind of invest in security? Because there's a component that will always be educating the people that you have, like bringing that awareness, as well as having some kind of insurances in place when it comes to security, right? Backups, you already mentioned one of them. Are there like a few other things you want in place, or how would you kind of spread that awareness and make sure your company would be robust in that way?
So what I would do for small or medium-sized businesses that for financial reasons can't afford full-time staff to deal with these problems, I would literally find some kind of a service provider to do it.
Hmm.
It's too important to rely on just someone who claims they know it, and they might, but then that's a vulnerability because they leave the company. You're in trouble trying to find that person.
Yeah.
So it's a combination. At least, I would have the consultant or uh, company that helper company, so to speak, come in and train staff or train a specific person in your company to deal with IT security, but have it on an ongoing basis. So, like, once a quarter, you have a course or whatever. I think that's really important because otherwise, you're relying on either someone high up in the company, CEO, keeping abreast of this, which I don't know if they have time for that, or you're relying on your IT personnel who might be overwhelmed. I've seen in small businesses, medium-sized businesses, you get IT departments that tend to be overwhelmed a bit. And as it is, they're having trouble juggling their priorities. And it's not that they don't want to deal with data protection. It's just that this is something that might happen, but the customer will phone about something. So what do you
Yeah.
deal with right now? There might be disaster today, or this customer who gets really angry is going to phone in 10 minutes. Well, I'm dealing with Mr. Angry Customer or Mrs. Angry Customer because the disaster might happen. That's the problem. And what will happen, you keep putting it off, and it never happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. It's interesting because in any company, like you always kind of need two of the same thing, whether it's a role or like responsibilities, because if one person is on vacation, you don't want things to come to a standstill when shit hits the fan. And you want that
Yeah.
awareness and knowledge to be accommodated for by like two people. And especially if it's not part of your core business, like if you're not a security company, I mean, if you are a security company, you're also more so a target, especially if you are like your main thing is security. But if it's not like your core business, then usually it's not really, it's harder to fit that in whatever you're already doing up to a par where you need it, up to a level where you need it. So then outsourcing it just by virtue of it not being core to your domain, I understand that. I think that's some solid advice right there.
Yeah.
It's hard though because you do need that awareness at least within your organization. So I still feel like you need to accommodate for that in some way or form, uh, but to a
Definitely.
lesser degree than figuring out kind of those technical affordances you need. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let's
I mean, with the
see.
consultancy too, that one of the key elements with them to play also an educational role, because that's also half of the ball game. I mean, the person who receives the email and doesn't know that you should look at the actual where it's from. I mean, I get those every day. It says from my boss, Geoff, I know you've been, doing those KodeKloud podcasts. Get in my send me right now your whatever. Oh my God, he found out. Yeah, but you can react quickly because it says the name of your boss. Ooh, so the consultants, whoever they are, should also educate, constantly remind you. Remember, check that. Is it really from the boss? Is it really this? IT department will never ask for your password, that kind of thing, because we're all human. That's the other thing too, is to remember that we're not perfect. I'm not perfect, and no one's perfect. We make mistakes. Um, at the same time, we think out of the box. Computers can't do that. So we have our, you know, downsides. We have our upsides too. So
Yeah. Yeah. The scary part is, I mean, from my point of view, without hearing and being aware of like the stories or what can happen, what goes wrong, it's harder to be like, okay, does that really impact me? Like, is that relevant for me? And it was interesting because I was listening to this audiobook about from Stephen Bartlett. It's called Happy Sexy Millionaire. And I like his podcast as well that he does. And in there, like there was one chapter where all of a sudden shit got real because he figured out that people had been sending emails from under his name to customers and they were just rude. Tell this person to hurry up or shut down that deal, or why is this guy like causing trouble? And he didn't send any of that. But just like being aware of that it could happen, man, he had to do so much like phone calls and there was so much relationship damage going on. Like they lost, I think, 70% of their clientele just because of that hack, someone impersonating them and destroying all those relationships they had built up.
yeah.
And he said the same thing. He said, I didn't think it would happen to me, but it was clear to me that there was a problem and we needed to fix it.
And you hit on another really important topic there. The damage that these things do are not just to your data, but to reputation.
Yeah.
And reputation sometimes is really important. So even if you explain, oh, I got hacked, whatever, then someone's gonna say, well, Yeah, okay, but why did you get hacked? And what if you're a
Yeah.
bank? You say, "Oh, I'm really sorry those root emails weren't for me. I got hacked." Oh, really? I've got all my life savings there. Well, I'm going to move them out. So reputation is another thing. I mean, basically, let's face it, data protection. Data protection is important. Why? Because it affects everything: reputation, your finances. Basically, it's your well-being. It can really drive you down. So it's worth it. And people do think it'll never happen to me, but um, that's where the pandemic played a good role in the sense because never sometimes happens, right, to
Yeah.
all of us.
Yeah. And it's you need to accommodate something for it. We're kind of reaching the final stages of
Yep.
our show. If you have any questions you want Geoff to answer, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll keep that open for a bit longer. And for as a final thought, because we already touched on kind of the future of data protection, do you think technology will evolve to a point where you don't need those affordances and they kind of come out of the box, or will there always be kind of a speciality needed in the form of a person accommodating for stuff?
So I think that you're always going to need a person,
Hmm.
and there's one reason for that. um, we never want to put all our eggs into one basket. I mean, you really want to trust technology, and if you do, you can watch the film Space Odyssey 2001. I don't know if it's an old film from the 1960s, but it's where the supercomputer who talks very polite, and then it decides, wait a minute, humans aren't perfect, so no, I'm afraid, and at one point there's a scene where he's in the pod, Dave, and he says, "Open the pod doors, Hal," and Hal says, "I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave." And so I don't think, I mean, that's a bit extreme, but I don't think we ever want to be in a situation where technology overpowers us. And the only
Hmm.
way we can have that not happen is to have a human being at the end of the control panel and a human being who controls things. So the other important thing about it is, which is really important, I'd say, especially to younger people, is the whole chat GPT thing. All this could create a tendency to try to avoid learning basics. And
Hmm.
I think that's a big mistake. I think no matter how many of these helpers we get, we should always start from the basics to understand. you know, I hear some coders saying, "Oh, I get a lot of my code to be done by ChatGPT." But what happens is, if you don't know what's underneath, or at least have an understanding of it, you become vulnerable again. So you're
Yeah.
vulnerable if you don't know. That's another thing. Lack of knowledge, and this is where for KodeKloud, it's a great thing. Lack of knowledge is a data protection problem. If you don't know the technology, if you don't understand technology, you don't have a leverage to technology, that is a vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And it's hard, right? Because stuff like ChatGPT, even cloud environments make things so easy, but then it's also becoming ever so easy to make mistakes along the way or to not know what you actually don't know, right? Because no one's doing this on purpose, but you might be at risk there.
Yep,
I think
exactly.
that's where we're going to round it off, Geoff. This was a
Yep.
lot of fun. I love
Yeah,
having
no,
this
it's great.
conversation.
I go on all day,
Cool. We're going to round it off there then. Thank you so much, Geoff, for coming on.
Thank you.
If you're still listening, feel free to drop a like on whichever platform you're listening. Go to our YouTube channel and subscribe because we have a lot more of this content. Tomorrow, there'll be another live session, same time, same place. And check out Free Week because there's only a few days left. Thank you for listening, and we might see you tomorrow.